Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live webcast about aquaculture in celebration of National Aquaculture Week. I'm Jerry Schubel, president of the Aquarium of the Pacific. We're broadcasting today from the Ocean Science Center at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. As you watch this presentation, we invite you to send your questions on Twitter to @AquariumPacific using the hashtag AOP Aquaculture, or by sending an email to live@lbaop.org. Aquaculture, or farming of the sea, is playing an increasingly important role in meeting the growing demands on our food supply. Growing our domestic aquaculture activities would have many benefits. It would ensure a sustainable supply of seafood, ensure the safety of our seafood, ensure that the seafood is grown and harvested in socially and environmentally responsible ways, reduce our domestic food system's environmental footprint, and reduce the U.S. seafood trade deficit. Clearly, there's much to be gained by nurturing the development of a domestic, environmentally responsible offshore aquaculture industry. Today, we are announcing the release of a report about offshore marine aquaculture. It is the second report on this topic. Both were the result of workshops held here at the Aquarium of the Pacific with experts representing a broad cross-section of stakeholders, including scientists, regulators, environmentalists, and industry practitioners. The participants discussed the application of the best available science and tools that could inform decision-making for the permitting of marine aquaculture in California. As I said, the beneficial aspects of establishing a robust aquaculture industry are significant, and Southern California could serve as a model for the rest of the nation. We have favorable oceanographic conditions, proximity to large markets, and scientific and technical expertise necessary to support an environmentally responsible aquaculture program. And we also have a very strong ocean ethic. Our report focuses on Southern California for these reasons, but this is an issue that's important for the entire nation. The U.S. currently imports 90% of its seafood by value, and most of it comes from sources that may or may not adhere to the same stringent environmental and health safety standards as we do in this nation. And more than half of it is farm-raised. To date, there are no aquaculture farms commercially producing in U.S. federal waters, although we have 2 mussel farms that have been permitted. One is in California and one is in Massachusetts. Now I would like to introduce Dr. James Morris. He's marine ecologist with NOAA's National Ocean Service and National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. He was one of the workshop participants, and he will speak to NOAA's efforts to address the research needs of aquaculture. James?
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks, everyone, for coming out and visiting with us about aquaculture. Aquaculture is something that's sort of dear to my heart. I grew up in a commercial fishing family on the banks of North Carolina, and grew up in the family that began to culture clams and oysters when I was a young kid. And so it's something that I have worked on literally almost my entire life. I really appreciate the opportunity to bring our NOAA resources to thinking about sustainable siting of marine aquaculture off the California coast. California has such a long history of an agricultural economy that it is no surprise that California is certainly thinking about offshore aquaculture as an important pathway to sustainable seafood for the U.S. It's been a pleasure to work with Jerry Schubel and here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, as well as California Sea Grant, and then the many state and federal agencies that have been a part of this process over the last 3 years. We've learned a lot together. Part of the importance of this project was to get to know each other and to provide a forum for conversation about aquaculture development. both in terms of its necessity, in terms of food security for our nation, but also in terms of the importance of understanding what is sustainable aquaculture. How do we know when it is sustainable, and how do we know when it's not? And really getting into the science behind that has been a real challenge for all of us, because we have no experience with offshore aquaculture with finfish aquaculture in this region. So we have had to learn together a lot of things for the first time. I would like to say that that NOAA is certainly committed to understanding how to grow sustainable aquaculture around our nation's coast. We have the NOAA aquaculture policy. We have the Department of Commerce aquaculture policy. We understand that aquaculture development is a national priority, and that we need to bring the science to bear to do that. Over the last several years, 3 or 4 years, we've been working to assess the state of science for aquaculture development and sustainable aquaculture siting. We did a global survey of all the environmental concerns with aquaculture and looked into the scientific literature about all the things that was documented about those specific concerns, whether it be impacts with water quality or benthic, impacts to the sea floor or protected species like whales and dolphins and such. And we looked at what the science says about aquaculture and really synthesized that and worked to understand it. And the main outcome was that we're very confident that the science and technology exists to do sustainable aquaculture. The key is that we have to be smart about where and how we do it. And so that's what we've been working to bring to bear here in Southern California, is to make sure that we understand the system, the offshore waters of California, and to bring to bear all of the science and technology that has been developed in this region to understand how to do it, how to site it sustainably. We have built what we think is probably one of the most comprehensive environmental models to predict aquaculture performance in the environment to date. We worked very closely with a consultant who has constructed and utilized this particular modeling approach all over the world. And we worked as a large modeling team of about 6 different scientific modelers to model the ocean currents, to model the performance of the fish within sea cages, to model the benthic deposition of anything coming from the farms, and to understand the assimilation and to understand the fate of any kind of nutrients that were coming out. We're very pleased with the outcome of that environmental modeling effort. It helped us understand a lot about the dynamics, the oceanography of the region, and we feel confident that with modeling tools such as AquaModel, that we can predict aquaculture performance and environmental interactions long before there's any fish or fish cages in the water. So that has been a large part of this project, is really bringing the modeling to bear to be able to simulate in sort of a virtual reality context what is going to happen in the future with aquaculture. We're excited about aquaculture in Southern California, and I appreciate your interest in it. And we have a regional aquaculture coordinator, Diane Wyndham, that is here in the region and is very astute at understanding all the different intricacies of the regulatory environment and how to help develop a pathway forward for this very important industry. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Next, I would like to welcome Paul Olin. He's an aquaculture specialist with California Sea Grant and the University of California, San Diego Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And Paul is going to describe some of the recommendations in our report. Paul?
Thank you, Jerry. Let me first of all just say that I'm really pleased to be able to be here and talk about the progress that has been made in aquaculture development over the last couple of decades. Farming of marine finfish is now to the point where we can view that as a reliable source of seafood for future generations. More than 40 years ago, Jacques Cousteau said, "We must use the ocean as farmers, not hunter-gatherers. We must plant the sea and herd its animals. Using the sea as farmers instead of hunters, that is what civilization is all about, farming replacing hunting." And that's where we are right now. We have significant demands for seafood. The global capture fisheries today are harvested at their maximum sustainable level. No one anticipates that there's going to be an increase in global capture fisheries that's going to meet the ever-growing demand for seafood. How do we farm seafood is really the question. We're very fortunate at this point in time to have a pretty sound research base to guide us as we move forward. We know what some of the obstacles are. Many of those have been conquered. With funding from NOAA and the National Sea Grant Program, we were able to convene a couple of workshops that gathered together experts in the field, that gathered industry practitioners and the regulatory community to talk about what we would envision as a developing marine finfish aquaculture industry. The first workshop was convened in April of last year, 2015, and identified a number of concerns that you're probably all pretty familiar with. One was the use of antibiotics and the development of vaccines over the last 2 decades has largely reduced the need for antibiotics in marine finfish aquaculture. To give you a visual, when salmon farming first began, about 100,000 tons per year were produced, and the antibiotic use was at this level. Here we are 20 years later, more than 2 million metric tons, up from 100,000 pounds of farm salmon is produced, and antibiotic use has dropped to less than 10% of what historically was the case. And that's through the use of applied research and development of vaccinations. James mentioned nutrient enrichment of the water column and the sediments underlying fish farms. We now have tools that allow us to do environmental modeling that can determine exactly what level of production you can have without significantly impacting both water quality and the sediments underlying a fish farm. Another concern was the escape of farm fish and their interactions with wild fish populations, and new net pen designs, new netting materials, and new management regimes have largely eliminated significant escapes of farm fish. And that's for the benefit of farmers, actually, who don't like to see their fish escape, but to the benefit of the environment as well. Fish meal is used in the formulation of many feeds for livestock, whether that's poultry, swine, or farmed fish. Everyone recognizes that the sources of fish meal are finite. If we're going to increase the production of animal protein, whether it's terrestrial or aquatic, we're going to need new sources of protein because increased sources of fish meal are just not available. That's well recognized in the use of agricultural byproducts and new biotechnologies is providing those feed ingredients so that we can see an expansion of marine finfish farming without an expansion of harvesting the forage fish that are used to produce fish meal. Conclusions of the workshop recognize that there will be continuing research challenges and that we need to match the research needs with the needs of the industry to further the sustainable development of marine finfish aquaculture. And then finally, the results of the workshop recognize that this is an emerging industry. The regulatory regime to manage it is being developed as we speak. And there was a final consensus of the workshop participants that they should work together as an interagency offshore aquaculture permitting working group to resolve issues as they arrive and to move this industry forward in a sustainable fashion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. John W. Gardner, the founder of Common Cause, once remarked, quote, "We are continually faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems," close quote. Open ocean aquaculture, I think, falls into this category. The U.S. and California have this huge opportunity to develop a thriving offshore aquaculture industry in federal waters. We, the United States, have the largest exclusive economic zone of any nation on Earth and one of the most stringent environmental programs and programs to ensure seafood safety. So we hope that this report will help move us a little bit closer to that destination. Now we're going to take a few questions that have been submitted by viewers. Do we have any, Claire?
Yes.
Are farmed fish more prone to diseases? I think we might get my two colleagues up here. Who wants to take that? Paul?
No, farm fish are not more prone to diseases than any wild fish. That said, if you combine animals in an area at fairly high densities, then the transmission of diseases is more likely to occur than it would with a separated wild population. And that's why we need the research and the use of things like vaccines so that we can manage disease in farmed animals, whether they're aquatic animals or whether they're terrestrial animals. Animal health is critically important, whether you're farming a cow or a pig or a chicken or a fish. It's just something that needs to be managed.
James, would you like to add anything?
I agree with everything that Paul said. Along those lines, the U.S. has one of the most strict environmental regulations in the world, and we are confident that the science and technology exists today to do aquaculture, even in an environmental regulatory environment that is one of the most robust environmental protection systems in the world. And such is the case with fish disease. There are regulations that regulate the amount of drugs that you can use in aquaculture. There are monitoring plans and monitoring programs that work to ensure that that disease that may occur on a farm doesn't spread to wild stocks and such. But we have the existing technology and science to be able to manage. But more importantly, as this industry develops, so does our need to adapt and to develop new approaches as well.
And I think our strong regulatory environment and our strong ocean ethic can work in our favor. Now, do we have any others, Claire? Since the presidential debate went over time, we're going to take a couple of extra minutes. Where in California should fish farms be located? James, you should start that.
Sure, thank you. Excellent question, and one that we're working on continuously. Because there is no experience in this region with siting offshore fish farms, we can't say we've been there and done that and are working to based on those lessons learned. We have to be very careful about the siting process. So in the National Ocean Service, in NOAA's National Ocean Service, and particularly in the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, we are working strategically to develop tools and provide services to federal agencies and state agencies to help them in the siting process. So we think about everything from the environmental parameters that go into that siting process, as well as the social and economic. And it's very important that that all of the whole system, the whole ecosystem, be considered as part of that siting process. So we're looking as part of a spatial planning, as part of an ocean planning process. There are lots of conflicts in Southern California with oil and gas, with shipping industry, with commercial and recreational fishing industry, and then also with military installations and military use. So our challenge is to work with all of those different parties and interests and determine what is the most suitable alternative for siting going forward.
And I think the short answer is that the modeling and the marine spatial planning tell us that in spite of all of the activities that take place off this coast, we have a number of sites that would be appropriate for offshore aquaculture. Claire? Who would be in charge of monitoring fish farms in case there is a problem?
Let me go again.
Come on, guys.
So there's a whole host of monitoring requirements that happen as part of aquaculture in an ocean or even in an estuary environment. So there's monitoring of the sea floor, there's monitoring of the water column, there's monitoring related to protected species interactions. There are, as part of the permitting process, there are mandates that are required that industry has to do monitoring, and then as well as the coastal managers have different types of monitoring approaches as well. We're working to understand that at a national level as well, and not just in California, but also in the Gulf of Mexico and along the East Coast. For shellfish and finfish aquaculture is what are the most important environmental parameters that need to be monitored, and what do those monitoring results mean in terms of sustainable aquaculture. We've learned a lot. We've got some ways to go, and as we get more experience with this industry, and as industry grows, so will our monitoring approaches adapt to those changes.
And we should remember that our coastal ocean off Southern California is one of the most intensively studied and monitored areas anywhere in the world ocean. Maybe we'll take one more, Claire. That's it. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for sending in your questions. I want to thank all of you for being here today. And that ends our live broadcast. And then we're going to show you the aquaculture film on science on a sphere.